As we're finding seats, feel free to continue to walk and pray at the same time. I always pray better when I'm moving. So the Lord be with you. Let us pray. Creator God, we thank you for those among us who help us to see the world in new ways. Be with us today as we celebrate the wonders of your creation and give you praise. All this we pray through your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. Come on down to a table. We've got an art project ahead of us today, but that'll be at the very end. So be sure you find a seat. So we are talking about Walter Anderson today, and I want you to raise your hand if you've ever heard of Walter Anderson. Sweet. Okay. Raise your hand if you own a piece of art by Walter Anderson. A few of you all? Great. Raise your hand if you've ever been to Ocean Springs, Mississippi. Oh, fabulous. That is great. So we've got a few who are familiar with Walter Anderson and a few who will be discovering this amazing artist for the first time. There are plenty of seats in the front. And you want to make sure you get a seat at a table because that will allow you to take place in our art project later on. So why do I love Walter Anderson? First of all, if you are a parent, Walter Anderson is proof that what your parents expose you to at a young age is definitely worth the hassle. Every summer on our way down to the beach, my parents would make a detour that I found highly irritating because I wanted to get to the beach. We would go to Ocean Springs, and oftentimes we would end up on a wild scavenger hunt for an obscure key to a community center or a cottage that belonged to a man named Walter Anderson. And these were wild goose chases. We'd end up in City Hall. We'd end up in this strange pottery studio. Now I know that that was shearwater pottery. And we would hunt down somebody who could let us in. And this right here is the community center. Just one wall of it. This was painted by Walter Anderson during the WPA, Works Progress. And he actually wanted to give it to Ocean Springs, but they paid him $1. He never did cash the $1 check that they paid him to paint this community center. But after a long hunt of trying to find the key to get into this place, you would go in and almost be transported to another world. And so eye rolling and all, I will tell you what you drag your children to at a young age does eventually get appreciated. And I thank my parents to this day. Second of all, my school did not have air conditioning, but it had a large Walter Anderson in the halls of Idlewild Elementary in Midtown, right as you walked in. So each day, going to school, I walked in to a beautiful block print made by Walter Anderson. And art appreciation in schools matters. It stuck with me. Walter Anderson also taught me that life, like art, is not about perfection. I am a recovering perfectionist. Everything I do, I have the little voice in my head saying that's not quite right. It could be better. I should start over. But Walter Anderson just let it be. His numbers and letters are often backwards. Probably in this day and age, he'd be diagnosed with dyslexia or some sort of processing. So you see that zebra up there, the Z, the S's, they're backwards in a lot of his block prints. And he didn't do them over. He let them stay that way. You see down in the butterflies right here? Look at that. Summer, it didn't quite fit on the page. So we just stuck the R above the E. That's okay. They know what it says. Me, I would have started the whole thing over again. But not Walter Anderson. He gave me permission to not be a perfectionist. So that is another reason that I love his art. The magic hour, right here. This was a memoir written by his wife, Agnes or Sissy Anderson. And raise your hand. I know at least one person has read this. Okay, great. Oh, good. It's right over here on Mary Henry's table right here. And it's called Approaching the Magic Hour. Now, when I was growing up, 5 o'clock was called the witching hour. And it was also the hour that I loved the most of every summer day. 5 to about 8 o'clock, when the sun started setting and the lightning bugs and the crickets came out. And the sound to me was just, for me, it was a thin place. Come on down to the front. You got to come to a table because otherwise you don't get to watercolor. So you got to come down to the front tables, plenty of seats. For me, that was a thin place. And it still is to this day. If I don't get outside at dusk in the summertime, I'm grumpy. So Walter Anderson touched a place in me that I just thought, somebody else gets it. It's not the witching hour. It might be for babies. But this, for me, is when I feel the closest to God. And I want to read you a quote that I actually have in a journal that I kept all through college. It says, "It's approaching the magic hour before sunset when all things are related. Light in everything. No lost places disappearing without definition. Everything needing to be considered in relating the parts to the strange and transient unity." Walter Anderson wrote that while he was on Horn Island, his then place, in one of his logs. He kept a lot of writings, a lot of watercolors. He really did just everything that he saw and that he wanted to bring to life, he wrote down. Come on down, lots of places at tables in the front. You got to get so that you can get to watercolors later on. The last reason that I love Walter Anderson is that I met another Hester who loved Walter Anderson just as much as I did. And her name was Hester Bass, and she wrote a book called The Secret Life of Walter Anderson. And I just thought that was really fun that somebody else had my name other than my grandmother and that she loved this artist just as much as I did. I believe that the McDonald's table has that book, The Secret Life of Walter Anderson. And the way she opens it, it's an invitation to all of us. There once was a man whose love of nature was as wide as the world. There once was an artist who needed to paint as much as he needed to breathe. And that was very true for Walter Anderson. So I'm grateful to get to dive into his journey today with you all. So first, some background. Oh, and this is another quote that I love about it. Our lives improve only when we take chances. The first and most difficult risk we can take is to be honest with ourselves. There is one thing that Walter Anderson was, and that was honest to who he was, even if that made him not quite fit in with the world around him. So a little bit of background just to kind of give us some context for what we're going to talk about today. Walter Anderson was known for his watercolors, his ink drawings, his linoleum block prints. He wanted art to be accessible and affordable to all people. He had extraordinary murals. He would just paint from floor to ceiling, covering every inch of a room. And for his family's studio, which was Sherwood Pottery, and he did design work for them, he actually called himself a decorator because that's how he saw himself. He said, I want to make art that is useful, that surrounds you in your everyday life, and that everyone can have in their home. He worked in so many different mediums. A lot of times artists have one or two ways that they express their art, but he sculpted wood, usually on the screen porch of his cottage. He made all of his furniture. If you go to the cottage, you'll see that these chairs are the pelicans of the Gulf Coast, or the cranes, or the herons, and the table that he had in his breakfast room, the legs of it are blue jays. It's exquisite. He also hooked his own rugs. All the rugs in the cottage he made himself. He made stained glass. He just did all sorts of things. If it could be made into art, Walter Anderson did it. The Sherwood pottery was run by his older brother, Peter, and it was his main source of income. It was how he sustained life while he made his art. His daughter said, there are still 5 chairs right up front. So I see Jim looking back there. People can come right up here. Yep. And 2 chairs right in the middle. So perfect. He was expected, his daughter says, about 10 pieces a week. About 10 pieces a week. Sometimes it would be a little bit less than that, but prolific decorating of pottery, and that was how he maintained a lifestyle while taking off to Horn Island for days and weeks on end. Now his art can be seen in collections all over the country. Brooks Museum has done an exhibit. Did anybody go when Brooks did the exhibit on Walter Anderson? A few of you all? Yeah, it was just, breathtaking. He was born in 1903 in New Orleans. You see his self-portrait right there in the middle. His parents were George Anderson, who was a grain merchant, and Annette McConnell Anderson, who was an artist. He got his love for art from an early age. He was one of 3 boys, his oldest brother, Peter, and then Walter, who they called Bobby or Bob his whole life. He would actually probably be a little shocked that we all call him Walter. And his youngest brother, Mac. And they were all pretty much in the pottery business and worked together. He attended Parsons Institute of Design in New York and the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. So he did have formal training as well as just, coming up through the pottery and his mom being an artist as well. So he had some formal training in his background. He got a very prestigious grant to go over to France and study for a time, and he thought it was okay, but in Paris, he really just did not like all the people. He was a little more of a introvert, a recluse, and so he took off for the Pyrenees and discovered some cave paintings there. And those cave paintings became transformative in the way that he approached his art. A lot of people will look at his block prints and say, it looks almost like hieroglyphics. And it's that very basic form and function of the early primitive cave paintings that he was exposed to when he was over in France. He came back to Ocean Springs, Mississippi, after studying abroad and met Agnes, or Sissy, as they called her. And they got married and had 4 children, Mary, Billy, Leaf, and John. The children, I think, were the love of Walter Anderson's life, but also the bane of his existence. Both and. He was a very conflicted man later in his life, and it was hard to have the children around sometimes. There was so much going on in his head, so having them running around and the noise and all. For a time, the family lived at the mother's family's place over in Oldfields in Gautier, and Walter stayed back at the cottage later in his life. So he absolutely adored his children, but was probably not what they would have called the Norman Rockwell dad. In the 1930s, worked for the WPA and painted the mural in the community center. Again, not for the salary of it, but for the love and wanting to share what he saw in the world. In 1937, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. He had a lot of mental illness all through his life, and it really kind of exacerbated in the late 30s. Some people say as he was, for his honeymoon, he and Sissy did a canoe trip down the Mississippi. Can you imagine? I can't even imagine this. I wouldn't even stick my toe in the Mississippi sometimes. They did this canoe trip down, and on that, right near here in Memphis, he contracted malaria. And a lot of people who look at his life say that it was after that it really got worse, and maybe that triggered something in him that kind of exacerbated the mental illness. But anyway, a lot of our best artists were on that border between in this world and in another world, very much like the modern day Van Gogh. Kids would go by and laugh at him as he was painting the convention center, the visitor center, and that was just like the kids who would throw the rocks as Van Gogh was painting in the fields. So his family moved to Gautier, Mississippi, to Old Fields, which is a plantation that his wife's parents owned there. And he stayed in the cottage later in life, but he oftentimes got on his bike and rode all the way to Old Fields just to be with his family for the night, and would get up at the break of dawn and bike back. It was a multi-hour journey, and the state troopers at the time were so worried about him. Oftentimes they would go and try to kind of check up on him each inch of the way, because they said, why is he going on these interstates late at night on his bike? But he rode his bike everywhere. And I actually got to see his bicycle on the screen porch of the cottage when I was in grade school and had no idea the significance of what that was. He rode it across Texas one time. Rode it to New York. This guy was crazy. He also spent days at a time out at Horn Island. He had a little boat and no motor. He, just like his bike, he didn't want the motor. He would row I think it was 12 miles of open water over to Horn Island, where there was no accommodation. Oftentimes he would just sleep under the boat at night on the beach. But that was his sanctuary. That was his place where he felt one with nature. He didn't have to act like the rest of the world was acting. He was in a safe place. And he painted and wrote prolifically. He died in 1965, also in New Orleans. Complications from a surgery related to lung cancer, but so many other things as well. It was just a tough life, health-wise for him. There's his cottage. This little room that sticks out on the edge, that was the room that we're going to be talking about today. And he did almost all of his other type of art out on the screen porch, a lot of wood carving and pottery. And then they added this room on as a nursery for their first child, and that's what later he painted. So this is their cottage, and really, it's still there today, but significant damage in Katrina. So it's kind of hard to imagine what it was like when they were living there. So the little room was his sanctuary. Nobody saw the room that he painted in this cottage until he died. It had padlocks on the outside door and on the inside door. And after days of searching for the key, they ended up just breaking the locks and walking in. His wife, Sissy, saw so many things that Walter Anderson had brought back from Horn Island, stacked. Buoys, alligator skulls, shells, old coolers. I mean, everything just stacked up. And she walked in, and I can imagine. I mean, as a widow, she walks in, and she's like, I'm going to have to go through all this. Her sister, who was married to Walter's older brother, Peter, was right behind her and could see the walls and the ceiling. And she exclaimed, "My God, creation at sunrise." She was looking at the walls and just taken aback. It was just amazing. That's what they called the room for many, many years. And in this room, they eventually found there was a chest in the corner that had 3 stacks of his Horn Island watercolors that he had actually chosen to keep. There are plenty of seats right up here in the front, so be sure to come grab one. About 1,500 watercolors that he had not destroyed. They found stacks of them in the fireplace as well. So the amount of art he must have burned is probably at least as much as, or more than we have today. So they found a chest of watercolors. They also found a small cardboard box of writings. All original writings by Walter Anderson, except for one that was on top. And eventually this one became the key to unlocking the meaning behind the small room. It was a handwritten copy of King James Version of Psalm 104. A handwritten copy by Walter Anderson of Psalm 104. And this psalm is what unlocks the meaning of the small room. So today we're going to talk a little bit about this room. And all of this comes from the book A Painter's Psalm. And so I want to say on the front end, the images and the material are all in this book, and from the Walter Anderson Museum, from Realizations, which is what the family runs now, kind of a gift shop of his things, and then also from Shearwater Pottery. So that's where I've gotten all of this material, and obviously, we're not going to reproduce it and sell it outside of this class. But I want to just quickly read through Psalm 104 before we look at the room. And what I'm going to ask is for each person who volunteers to read 5 verses and then go to the next person because it's really long and y'all don't want to hear my voice that whole time. So just don't be shy. Raise your hand if you want to read 5 verses and we'll pass around the mic.
Bless the Lord, O my soul. O Lord, my God, Thou art very great. Thou art clothed with honor and majesty. Who coverest thyself with light as a garment, who stretchest out the heavens like a curtain, who layeth the beams of his chambers in the waters, who maketh the clouds his chariot, who walketh upon the wings of the wind, who maketh his angels spirits, his ministers a flaming fire, who laid the foundations of the earth, that it should not be removed forever.
Thou coveredst it with the deep as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. At thy rebuke they fled. At the voice of thy thunder they haste away. They go up by the mountains. They go down by the valleys unto the place which thou hast founded for them. Thou hast set a bound that they may not pass over, that they turn not again to cover the earth. He sendeth the springs into the valleys, which run among the hills.
They give drink to every beast of the field. The wild asses quench their thirst. By them shall the fowls of heaven have their habitation, which sing among the branches. He watereth the hills from his chambers. The earth is satisfied with the fruit of thy works. He causeth the grass to grow for the cattle, and herb for the service of man, that he may bring forth food out of the earth, and wine that maketh glad the heart of man, and oil to make his face to shine, and bread which strengtheneth the man's heart.
The trees of the Lord are full of sap, the cedars of Lebanon, which he hath planted, where the birds make their nest. As for the stork, the fir trees are her house. The high hills are a refuge for the wild goats, and the rocks for the conies. He appointed the moon for seasons. The sun knoweth his going down. Thou makest darkness, and it is night, wherein all the beasts of the forest do creep forth.
The young lions roar after their prey, and seek their meat from God. The sun arises, they gather themselves together, and they lay them down in their dens. Man goeth forth unto his work, and to his labor until the evening. O Lord, how manifold are thy works! In wisdom hast thou made them all. The earth is full of thy riches. So is this great and wide sea, wherein are things creeping innumerable, both small and great beasts.
There go the ships. There is that Leviathan, whom thou hast made to play therein. These wait all upon thee, that thou mayest give them their meat in due season. That thou givest them, they gather. Thou openest thine hand, they are filled with good. Thou hidest thy face, they are troubled. Thou takest away their breath, they die and return to dust. Thou sendest forth thy spirit, they are created, and thou renewest the face of the earth.
The glory of the Lord shall endure forever. The Lord shall rejoice in his works. He looketh on the earth, and it trembleth. He toucheth the hills, and they smoke. I will sing unto the Lord as long as I live. I will sing praise to my God while I have my being. My meditation of him shall be sweet. I will be glad in the Lord. Let the sinners be consumed out of the earth, and let the wicked be no more. Bless thou the Lord, O my soul. Praise ye the Lord.
So Walter Anderson was spiritual but not religious before that was a thing. He was not a churchgoer, but deeply spiritual, and his connection to God was through nature. Throw out some words that jumped out from that page. Just throw them out. Bill. Leviathan! Leanne got this one in a 5:30 service one time, and you can't read that lesson without giggling a little bit. And then there's this Leviathan that he put on in the water just for the fun of it. I love it. Okay, what else? Wild goats. You're going to see some, too, in the mural. What else? Lots of water and green, lush vegetation and water. Very good. Those show up time and time again on each of the walls, actually. What else? The sun and the moon. Yes, light and darkness have a lot to do with this mural. I heard one back here. Lots of animals. Lots and lots of animals named in this psalm. Absolutely. Anything else? Psalm 104. I know the King James Version is not what we're used to reading, but that's what Walter Anderson went on, and so that was the inspiration for this mural, and that's what I wanted us to read today. I loved how at one point, how great and manifold are thy works. And it starts with something about putting a garment. What is it? Thou art clothed with honor and majesty, who coverest thyself with light as with a garment. Someone, I think Christy mentioned the light. And this entire mural you're about to see is basically taking the light from dawn until midnight, and it works around the room. So you come in and it's daybreak, and it goes all the way around the room to night. And instead of having the Holy Land in there, it's all vegetation and places from the Gulf Coast. So Psalm 104, as seen in the context of the Gulf Coast. Also, in these pictures, it is not possible to see one of the most important elements that Walter Anderson had of this, and that was that the windows in the cottage, all the mural was meant to play with the vegetation and all that you saw right outside of the windows. And so in its original place, you would look out the window, and he planted all the vegetation that you could see through the windows. He brought plants that he wanted there. And so that was a part of the mural. Now the room has been moved to the museum to preserve it, which is very, very important, especially because of hurricanes and the weather that they have there. But to keep in mind that there was a piece of this that was a part of the element that we don't get to experience today. So that is an introduction. Who's ready to see it? And by the way, if anybody wants to take a pilgrimage down there at any point, come let me know or email me, because I would love to go experience this in person with each one of you. Mary Henry and I have been through together, and it's just, I mean, you can only do so much in slides, but here we go. As you walk in, the east wall is dawn, sun rising, almost as if it's peeking, about to peek over the horizon as you look out the window. There's a cock that's crowing above the window, and it's very hard to see in here, but he's up there. There's a cock crowing up there. There's also Old Fields, which was his wife's family's plantation, is over here, and you can see there are two sandhill cranes. There's the water right there. And over here, which you cannot see in this slide, are a herd of goats. They're the wild goats from the psalm. So hopefully we'll be able to go really see this in person at some point. But under the window, I wasn't able to get a good shot of that one, but there's a little possum who's still foraging at daybreak, but he's about to go back into his hole for the day. You can see a bullfrog, a cat. Cats are all through Walter Anderson's art, a grasshopper, and a morning cloak butterfly. To the right of the window, you see more of the ocean right here in the sandy bluffs with lots of flora and fauna from the Gulf Coast. You see a blue jay right here going and getting that early worm. Also, look up here. Some of night still peeking through, even as the sun is coming up over the horizon. You've got the night stars still right there. And then you're about ready to go around to the south wall. This, as you walk in that door, that's right in front of you. And right over here in this corner, there's kind of a summer squall or rainstorm happening. And here's the rainbow coming right up out of the storm, the morning showers that they would have so often in the Gulf Coast. There's your Leviathan. The alligator down there, the Gulf Coast Leviathan. You've got some bunnies coming out in the morning, some of the birds. As the deer longs for the water brooks, coming down for a noon drink in the hot Gulf Coast sun. You've got the clouds and the light coming out after that storm, those kind of big billowy clouds of the afternoon. A whole flock of birds over here with the water still in the distance and lots of lush vegetation all throughout. You've still got some of the water over here as well. You can't see through the windows in these because in order to get the colors of the inside, it's hard to get through the windows as well. But this was the one wall that had 2 windows in it. And for Walter Anderson, just being able to be pulled outside, that's where he wanted to be. But if he had to be indoors, he'd create the outside indoors. The west wall. We're getting into afternoon, into the magic hour. You've got sunset kind of glowing, giving everything that kind of orange, beautiful light when everybody wants to get their picture taken. You've got the sun starting to set there. A cat prowling, kind of getting ready for that night hunt. Every animal's coming out to eat. Again, lots of vegetation over here, all Gulf Coast plants. You've got some butterflies down here. The clouds are kind of starting to go down. You see how the sun rays are almost just coming up from the window? Right there. Another flock of birds doing their evening meal. In the psalm, it talks about how everything is organized by light, just as you see on these walls. Right here is the chest in which all the watercolors that he wanted to keep were stored safely. Right there, he made the chest as well. And then we come around to the focal point of the room. It's hard to see. He tried to fresco over the chimney. And we don't know why this figure looks unfinished. If he couldn't bear to finish it, if he ran out of time, or if that's the way he wanted it to stay. It's all speculation. But a goddess-like figure, some say with the face of his oldest daughter, Mary. Some say with the face of his wife, Sissy. The antlers, do you see that right here? There was a big wooden statue that he had in the yard called Father Mississippi. And most people think that this was a recreation of that statue, Mother Mississippi. And as you can see, the tributaries coming down to the mighty Mississippi. On the west, you have at the bottom here, and you can't see it in the slide, but at the bottom you have a roadrunner and a cactus signifying the west. On the right, you have all animals from the east. So dividing the west from the east, the eastern wall, the western wall, and here's the mighty Mississippi in between. Some say that Walter Anderson was so reclusive in his later life, drawing into nature, but maybe this was a way to reconcile as well with family and with people, realizing the connection between nature and person. And night, unlike all the other ones that had a lot of flora and fauna in it, night here is all depicted by the beautiful night moths. They would put beer and sap on the trees during the day, and when the night came, his family would run outside and try to spot as many different kind of moths as they could because they were beautiful. And that's how he chooses to signify night in this mural. Again, just absolutely breathtaking in person. The ceiling has a zinnia. For a long time, they couldn't figure out what this was until they found a poem in the chest that says, "O zinnias, most explosive and illuminating of flowers, summation of all flowers, essence of eccentric form, essence of concentric form." His wife, Agnes, thinks that kind of symbolizes the eccentricity of Walter Anderson, trying to make sense of a very concentric and patterned world. You can read into it any way you want, but that's what she saw when she looked up. What are some thoughts as you all look at the walls? What does it make you reflect upon? The first time I went in there, all I could do was just stand and let it just kind of wash over me. My parents did actually take us to the cottage into this room when it was still in its original position. I wish I could go back to my 7-year-old self and say, look at what's outside of the windows. But alas, at least I can say I was there, even if I don't recall. So that's his room. He was happiest and at peace in Horn Island, but he had to come back. He had to come back to do his work and his obligation at Sheerwood Pottery and his obligation to his family. And so when he came back, this was his sanctuary. This was his safe place that no one else even knew existed until he died. And now it's such a gift to all of us. Today in the 10:30, you're going to hear about casting nets into the sea. The fish are a large part of our gospel narrative. And here is a wonderful block print of 3 fishermen in the sea. It says, so, and this is from the Psalm, so is this great and wide sea wherein all are things creeping innumerable, both small and great beasts. So today, you are each going to get to create your own Walter Anderson fish. And remember, Anderson was not about perfection. Anderson was about art. I did this with first graders at St. George's. And yesterday I said, if I can do this with first graders, I can do this with adults. The main difference being that adults are a lot more timid because somebody in your life told you you weren't an artist, maybe. Or somebody in your life said, keep your day job. Okay? But we are all artists in the room, and you are going to see small cards in the middle of each table. This is watercolor paper. Raise your hand if you need any more. I think I put about 7 sheets on each table. But raise your hand if you need another piece at your table. And I'm going to give these to Christy, and she can bring them around. If anybody needs one, raise your hand. Thank you. I hope my children were awake. Thank you. Anybody else need one? Christy's coming around with more paper if you need it. Okay, if you are brave, grab a Sharpie. If you are timid, grab a pencil. You can do this with either one. I'm grabbing a Sharpie, though. If you are brave, grab a Sharpie. If you are timid, grab a pencil. And we are going to start with step 1. Step 1, we are breaking down a fish into basic form and function, basic shape. Okay? So you've all got a pencil or a marker in your hand. Yes, Jim. Oh, you can raise the light a little bit. Yeah, that'd be great. Okay, grab a Sharpie or a pencil. There are 2 more spots right down at this front table if anybody still needs a seat. Okay, I'm going to do it with you. Step 1. You're going to create a half circle at the bottom of your page. Think of it as a turtle in its shell, a half circle at the bottom of the page. Okay, look up when you finish that, and then I'll kind of know that we can move on. A half circle at the bottom of the page, step 1. Okay, does everybody have a pencil, Sharpie, and a piece of paper? Okay, you got the half circle at the bottom of the page. I'm seeing quite a few eyeballs here. Okay, next, you're just going to put a big old oval on top of that half circle, right here. Think of it as a really big oval without the bottom part. So you stuck an Easter egg on top of the turtle. An oval on top of the half circle. Now, none of Walter Anderson's fish ever looked alike, so it's okay if yours looks different from your neighbor's. That is all right. Step 2, this is going to be a little bit trickier, but you're going to create the top fin. And you're going to start about halfway on the top of this oval, about halfway, and you're just going to kind of have a fun slide down to the middle of the fish's back. You're going to just slide on down to the middle of the fish's back, create a fin. Slide on down to the middle of the fish's back. The fish is looking up at the sky. It's about to get caught in the net of the disciples. Okay, and you're going to create that fin. It's okay if it doesn't look just like what's on the screen. No 2 of my fish turned out the same either. Now you're going to create the mouth. You're going to go in and then up to create the mouth. As if this fish is about to swallow Jonah. You're going to create that mouth. And then you're going to add the bottom fin. Again, you're just going to kind of swirl around and create a small bottom fin. Swirl around a small bottom fin. Y'all with me? I see a few people who are looking scared to death. Take a deep breath. Deep breath. You're going to be okay. There are no grades and there is no bad art. No such thing as bad art. 4, we're going to add the eyeball. It's a great big Egyptian-looking eyeball. An oval in the middle of that eye. Fried egg. Did I hear fried egg? That's great. Big old eyeball. That's what we're adding next. Right here. Step 5, we're going to add the little lines in our fins. You can add as many or as few lines as you want. Add a few lines to make these look like fins. Again, they do not have to be perfect. They do not have to be straight. They do not have to be even. Lines. You're adding texture. You with me? Raise your hand if you're still breathing. We're good. We're good. Okay. Last, if you have a pencil, you're just going to kind of erase this part, but it's okay if you don't because its block prints kept the line in them. And then you're going to add one more line to this fin down here. One more line that just goes over that smaller one. That's it. Right here, you're just going to add one more kind of half circle going over that bottom fin that kind of connects it. It's right there. And it's okay if you don't erase that line. Mine's going to stay there. Mine's in Sharpie. I was brave. Okay? You ready for the last slide? Here we go. You're going to add some scales. And to add scales, you're just going to kind of copy this slope. It does not matter how many you add. You're just going to add some curvy lines, just like that. And then you're going to kind of just hook down off of them, like that. Kind of gives you that illusion of scales. And they don't have to all be perfect. They do not have to line up. They do not have to fit. And you've got yourself a fish ready to get caught in Galilee. If you used pencil, decide what lines are your friends, which ones you like, and go over them in Sharpie so you can share around your table. And you can go over the lines in Sharpie. And then I've given a few examples here of how these would get watercolored. Lots of different ways. You can use multiple colors in them. But you've got some watercolors in the middle of the table. I imagine you'll be getting to this point at different times so you can share around and you can watercolor in your fish. So trace over the pencil in Sharpie, and then you can add watercolor if you would like. And most importantly, sign the back. You want to take full credit for this art. I'm going to move all around, so if anybody needs help, just raise your hand and I'll come around to you. So Barbara reminded me that Memphis College of Art actually takes a group of students down to Horn Island each summer. And so she has one of the watercolors that one of the students did when they went down to Horn Island. And sometimes when you drive, well, I don't know where it'll be now, but it used to be when you would drive past Overton Park, you would see, Horn Island exhibition. And that's because a lot of art students will carry on this legacy and will go out to Horn Island and paint. So as you all are finishing up, keep on painting while I'm talking. But as you're finishing up, I just want to read to you one of my very favorite Anderson quotes. This is Anderson's self-portrait of him rowing his little boat over to Horn Island. True hope responds to the real world. To real life, it is an active effort. Think about that quote as you hear today's gospel lesson. True hope responds to the real world. To real life, it is an active effort. Yes, Debbie. Yes, Debbie said, can you take a real pilgrimage down to Ocean Springs or to Horn Island? I am willing to lead a pilgrimage to Ocean Springs. If anybody wants to go, email me, write me a note, throw it in the offering plate, come let me know. I will definitely love to lead that one. I am not able to lead one to Horn Island. That is actually kind of proprietary. As far as I know, I'm not sure how they get people over there now. But I believe that I could find somebody who could connect you to a pilgrimage going to Horn Island. So if anybody is interested in seeing these works of art in real life, just let me know and we will schedule it, because I would love nothing more than to take a group down there. I think that would be wonderful.
I would love to go if I can.
Oh, good. Yes, one more question? Debbie. Debbie asked if he is very in tune with Scripture and the Bible, and did he internalize the Psalm? I do believe he internalized Psalm 104, because for him, that was his connection to God. I think he really saw something that that helped him feel like he wasn't as lost as the world would have him believe. I'm not sure he would win a Bible drill. I'm not sure that that would be the Walter Anderson you would know, but I do believe that this particular psalm was his way to make sense of the world and to make sense of God and his place in that cosmic picture. Absolutely. So continue to paint, enjoy, and I'll see you in church in just a few minutes.